A military coup in Myanmar becomes President Biden's first major foreign policy challenge. China is making everything more difficult. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. YouTube is still secretly unsubscribing people, so make sure you're still subscribed. President Biden vowed to end Trump's policy of America first. He's promised to work with America's allies, and that is being put to the test very early on in his presidency. So in a way, it's a coup for him that there's been a coup in Myanmar.
In the early hours of Monday, the Myanmar army took power and imposed a state of emergency for a year, saying it had responded to what it called election fraud.
I'll get to what the Myanmar coup means for Biden, and in particular, his relationship with China. But first, some background. The coup was shocking, and by shocking, I mean entirely predictable. Myanmar is here. It used to be called Burma, and sometimes is still called Burma. In 1962, the military staged a coup and took over the country. There were elections in 1990, but the military refused to hand over power. In 1989, they arrested opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi, head of the National League for Democracy Party. For most of the next 20 years, they kept her under house arrest. In 2011, the military junta that ruled the country was replaced by a government, one that was controlled by the military junta. But in 2015, Myanmar had its first general election in 25 years, and Aung San Suu Kyi's party won in a landslide. Why did the military go along with it that time? Because they got to write the new constitution. And guess what? Under the constitution, Myanmar's military has direct control of 3 key government ministries: Home Affairs, Border Affairs, and Defense, as well as a quarter of parliamentary seats reserved for the armed forces. It controls its budget and many enterprises. So you can see how Aung San Suu Kyi might have been in a difficult predicament. It might also explain why she defended the military when they were accused of genocide in 2019. But then why did the military stage a coup now if they already had so much power? It might be because Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, won an even bigger victory in the election back in November. And that's embarrassing for the military. Not to mention, it could threaten their power in the future. So, if a military coup worked before, maybe it'll work again. But the military junta isn't calling it a coup. The military just instituted a state of emergency in response to accusations of election fraud. Accusations that it made. And then the military arrested Suu Kyi and a bunch of other people as well. So what were the election fraud allegations? Well, we don't know. We do know that a lot of minorities in Myanmar were excluded from voting. But according to friend of the show, Benedict Rogers, the real explanation for the coup might not actually be election fraud. Instead, it might have to do with one man, Myanmar's commander-in-chief. He wants to be president. Knowing that he has to retire from his current post in June this year, he appears to have decided that if he can't be president using legitimate constitutional means, he would seize power anyway. So what happens now? Well, we're about to see President Biden go head-to-head with China. I'll explain after this short commercial break. Welcome back. Unless YouTube demonetized us again. In which case, please support America Uncovered for as little as $1 an episode on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Now maybe a lot of people don't really know about the coup in Myanmar. That can be the case even if you're an aerobics instructor in Myanmar with the coup happening literally right behind you. Governments come and go, but a good burn stays with you. The Biden administration has condemned it. The coup, that is, not the aerobics. He loves aerobics. How else could he stay so skinny after eating that much ice cream? The Biden administration has officially labeled the military takeover a coup. And there's talk the U.S. could reimpose sanctions that were lifted in 2015.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday threatened to reimpose sanctions, calling the coup a direct assault on Myanmar's rule of law. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
We removed sanctions, the United States, I should say, removed sanctions on Burma over the past decade based on progress toward democracy. The reversal of that progress will necessitate an immediate review of our sanctions laws and authorities, followed by appropriate action.
I wonder what Biden considers appropriate action. Now, Joe, put down the ice cream. That guy really loves his ice cream. But this is Biden's first major foreign policy challenge as president, especially because it requires that he deal with China. The Chinese Communist Party has taken a very different tone on the Myanmar coup. In fact, what coup? State-run Xinhua simply called it a major cabinet reshuffle. My favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, said it was an adjustment to the country's dysfunctional power structure. That's like saying the Trojan horse was just the delivery of an extremely large gift basket. It's probably not surprising that China's authoritarian communist regime doesn't have a problem with the military crushing democracy. But there's more to it than you might think. The Chinese regime just happens to be buddy-buddy with Myanmar's military. China is Myanmar's biggest supplier of weapons, providing most of its fighter aircraft, armored vehicles, guns, and naval ships. And it goes well beyond that. It has to do with what's called the Belt and Road Initiative. On the surface, it's China's global infrastructure investment plan. But the Chinese communist regime uses it to turn other countries into indentured servants. And Myanmar is a huge part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Last year, they agreed to hasten implementation of the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, a giant infrastructure scheme worth billions of dollars. Most of the construction has taken place in Myanmar's Rakhine state. It's the poorest state in Myanmar, and it's full of ethnic minorities known as the Rohingyas. They're the ones getting genocided, while Aung San Suu Kyi looks the other way. China endorses the genocide, which makes sense. After all, China is genociding their own Muslim minorities. But the Chinese Communist Party didn't let their friendship with Myanmar's military keep them from wooing the new NLD party. The friendship has blossomed in high-level exchanges between Aung San Suu Kyi and Chinese leaders, but also in interactions between party members on visits that mix tours of container terminals or education projects with boozy dinners and shopping trips. The Chinese Communist Party knows the way into every foreign government official's heart. Boozy dinners and shopping trips. And the Chinese Communist Party also exploited the rifts that grew between Myanmar and Western countries. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party has worked to strengthen relations with Myanmar after Western countries criticized Myanmar for genociding its Rohingya Muslims. And with the Belt and Road, China is heavily invested in Myanmar in a way the United States is not. That gives China way more power over Myanmar. But the U.S. can also act. I mentioned the Biden administration is considering reimposing sanctions. But here's what the Asia analysts at the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies have to say about that. Despite a decade of opening, U.S. businesses remain relatively modest players in the Myanmar economy. Those that have invested are mainly geared at providing goods and services to the domestic market in Myanmar, which means their departure will mostly harm private citizens. So U.S. sanctions could just end up hurting the people of Myanmar, not the military junta. But President Biden has been saying all along he's going to work with America's allies to get the job done. So the U.S. can get our allies to impose sanctions on Myanmar as well, ones that would more directly target the military. But it might not be that easy. It will be more difficult for the United States to get major investors in Myanmar like Japan and Singapore to follow suit. And the largest foreign player in Myanmar's economy, China, will be all too happy to recalibrate its engagement to recognize the new facts on the ground. That will likely soften the blow of any U.S. sanctions. In other words, if the U.S. is the only country that imposes sanctions, China will just gain more power in Myanmar. Biden could appeal to the United Nations, but China sits on the UN Security Council and wields veto power over any resolutions. And China just blocked a UN Security Council statement condemning the coup in Myanmar. So the U.S. is going to have a hard time with any attempts to get the UN to impose multilateral sanctions on Myanmar. So basically, the Chinese regime is making it hard for the Biden administration to have any direct impact from putting U.S. sanctions on Myanmar. And the Chinese regime can also stifle any multilateral approach to Myanmar. Being the president is hard. That's why I'm running for Supreme Leader. So what do you think of the challenges facing President Biden in dealing with Myanmar? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.